Here we are. We are live. So I see Lily's in the chat. She's our chief of staff and chief of publicity. Glad you figured out time zones, Lily. Welcome everybody to our live with Paula Kensu. We have an interview that's going to be released on the main podcast feed on May 7th, and it's really great. I joke with them, Paula. I never know whether my interviews are any good. I'm always convinced or not, but I felt really good about the interview and I went and listened this weekend and I think it's really powerful. So I'm glad you were willing to share your story. So it'll come out on Patreon for those of you guys who are on Patreon a little bit early, probably sometime next week or this week. And, when I was debating about whether to do a live interview with Paula, I don't know if I even mentioned this to you, Paula. I was thinking, should we just do it the two of us because it's so intimate, or should we do it as a live with listeners? One of our listeners and my friend, who's the wise one, like Lily's the chief of staff, Sophie's the person that we go to for wisdom, said, why don't you do both? Why don't you do the interview and then also give listeners an opportunity to ask questions? So we get the best of both worlds. And I really appreciate you, giving this time. I spend a lot of time asking people questions. So tonight, one of the things that I want to do is give listeners a chance to ask questions by actually joining us. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat and I'll drop it a couple more times. But basically, the link will let you join our waiting room and come on with your questions. Because one of the things that I think is really cool about that, I can read your question from the chat, but it's not going to have all the nuance. It's not going to give you guys a chance to have a follow-up conversation. So it's really, I think, an opportunity for you guys to do the cool thing that I get to do every day I'm recording, which is talk to these really interesting, fascinating people. And then before we go into the conversation, I want to just do an introduction to Paula, but I also want to thank Brett and Alice of the Prosecutors podcast for introducing me to Temujin's case. They have 2 episodes that they released in March of 2021 that I really recommend for anyone. I really suggest you guys go listen to them. I also should thank Jason Ursey from Santa May Be a Criminal and Robert Palmer from the Broken Systems podcast. They are both advocates for this. And you guys probably get, that's a weird collection, right? Skeptical Brett, skeptical Alice, skeptical Jason. And Jason Ursey may be less skeptical, but skeptical Robert and all of us all sort of see serious concerns in this case. That's definitely that should send a message to everyone that there's something amiss in this situation. So Paula, she's the wife of Temijun Kensu. He's a Michigan man who was serving a life sentence for murder. And for a murder he insists he didn't commit. So Paula's story, to me, in thinking back on our interview, is one really of perseverance, determination, a single-minded pursuit of justice for her husband and advocacy for other people who are in similar situations. Paula is not conventional in a lot of ways, including this not being the conventional marriage, or even the conventional marriage of somebody who is married to someone who's in prison. After reading about Temujin's story, Paula felt compelled to reach out to him to see if she could help with this case. They started communicating by prison email, then became friends, and eventually fell in love and got married. And I want you guys to pause there for a second. Just think about that for a moment. This woman chose to marry someone who had a life sentence. She chose to marry someone knowing that there's a chance that he would never have freedom and they wouldn't have freedom together. Like, a lot of people talk about love, but what greater love is there than to sort of lay down your life, your goals for another person? And even though I haven't had the chance to talk to Temujin, he must be pretty amazing based on that. So, what was it that led Paula to reach out to Temujin, believe so deeply in his innocence, marry him, and become an advocate for uh, uh, overturning his conviction or getting his sentence commuted? Temujin, who's once known as Fred Freeman, was convicted in 1987 for the murder of a man on a college campus in Port Huron, Michigan. His case has been said to be riddled with issues that raise serious doubts about the fairness of the trial. Multiple alibi witnesses placed him more than 400 miles away from the crime scene on the day of the murder. There's no physical evidence connecting him to the murder. And, the prosecutor was allowed to speculate this wild theory at trial with little basis in fact. And it included that Temujin was a ninja and could have theoretically, without any evidence to support this assertion, could have hired a plane to fly him from one end of the state to the other to commit the murder. So it's quite a case. Like I said, I recommend you listen to our episode. I recommend you listen to the prosecutor's episode and the interview that Robert did with her. So Paula, thank you and welcome. I wanted to go ahead and get us started with some questions to give our listeners some time to sort of come up with theirs. And the first one I wanted to ask you, in our interview, I talked about my skepticism about police, prosecutors, defense attorneys, defendants, anyone involved in the criminal justice system. Part of where that comes from is everybody has like really strong incentives in lots of different directions in that scenario. So I tend to be a skeptic in those situations. And I think you may not be all that different. So I'm curious, what was it that led you to believe in the possibility of Temujin's innocence and take it seriously?
It all started with an article that I read on a Facebook post by Nolan Finley of the Detroit News. And in this article, he laid out all of the things that went wrong in this trial. And as I'm reading through it, I'm just like, blown away. There was all of the things that you mentioned. There was a hypnotized witness. There was no physical or forensic evidence. There was a fingerprint found at the scene, but it did not match my husband's. He passed multiple polygraphs, as did his primary alibi witness, who was not allowed to testify, by the way, who was, bullied and tormented. She was pregnant at the time. And I've actually met Michelle. I've met Dash, who was one of his friends who was with him the night before. So I've met a lot of the people who have known that he was innocent because they were either with him at the exact time or within hours of the murder. And when you just read this article, it's just beyond belief that so many horrible things, coincidences could have happened. His attorney was drug addicted, who was later disbarred from practicing law. I reached out to the local nonprofit that supported him for over 15 years. It's Proving Innocence here in Michigan. And after just hearing all of these things and reading all of this information on the Innocence website of the University of Michigan, I was just like, I have to help this guy. And I also grew up in the same small area, the same small town that the victim was from. I grew up in that area. We actually went to the same high school, and I actually taught at the college that the victim was shot at. And I knew of the case. I was familiar with the case, but I never knew anybody was wrongfully convicted. So just reading all of this craziness and digging in a little bit, I was like, I have to meet, I checked out his Facebook page. I saw from the article that his wife had died 7 years earlier. And my heart just bled for this man. And I was just like, wow, the person that was fighting for him, he lost her 7 years ago, and it was at Christmas time. And even the article was, a man basically a man spending another Christmas behind bars for a murder he couldn't have committed. And it just goes on with the hypnotized witness, all these crazy things. And I'm like, this is just insanity. So I reached out to him.
I can't imagine. That must have been great timing for him, because I cannot imagine being in prison feeling like you're wrongfully convicted, and then to lose your wife and your partner. I can't imagine what that would feel like.
Yeah, and he's lost some people since then as he's been incarcerated, that very close supporters. And it's, I can't imagine being in a prison cell and finding out that somebody that you love passed away. You can't go to their funeral, you can't be there to support in any way.
Yeah, or
And
even get support, right? Like, as everyone
no.
else is mourning and going through grief. You mentioned in the interview, by the way, and people will get more insight into this when they listen to the episode, but that you would do it all again in a heartbeat for your husband. And, but you mentioned that you could never imagine what it would be like to be in this position. What has it been like?
Man, I'll tell you, it's been like a roller coaster. We definitely have our good days and we have our bad days. And, the system works in a manner such that they try to destroy family relationships. And, they say in their mission statement that they're trying to, rehabilitate these people and do all of these wonderful things, that it's completely a lie. Prison is a business. And they do everything that they can to try and interfere with the relationships. I mean, from visiting, being harassed by officers, being our video visits being cut off all of a sudden, or terminated, or just the petty games, and it's really, really frustrating. In addition to that, they have vendors that are just horrible vendors. They have the phone system. Goes through a company called GTL, Global Tel Network, and the phone calls, you press 0 to receive the call and it just hangs up. Or
The emails.
the emails are delayed by 5 business days. They don't have to release them. So, we try and communicate the best that we can, but it's always impeded by these outside things that are completely out of our control. And it impacts him severely. And especially because he lost his wife of 22 years behind prison walls. So he worries about me. And I mean, I could be on my way to the prison. He'll call. He knows that I'm coming for a visit. And then, I'll get there, and, the people checking you in for the visit will just play games and not let you in because of, for whatever manufactured reason they come up with.
Yeah.
And yeah. So, I mean, those are the things that you don't think about. Those are the things that you never would dream that, they can make your life such hell just because they can. And just because, and it's just like, every single day there's something new. He's not getting his mail, or, they're just, it's just childish sometimes, and it's petty, and it's just unnecessary. And I really feel like the gaslighting that they do to the prisoners in there by leaving the lights on constantly and no sleep allowed because everything's so noisy in prison, and all of the things that just drive these men and women absolutely crazy, which would drive me crazy. I mean, my gosh, I can't imagine not going out without sleep.
Right.
But all of these things just contribute to the frustration and the difficulty when you're trying to, connect with somebody so deeply. And it just really, it impairs them and it hurts them. And it's very difficult on us.
Yeah. And I think for you, you came into it kind of like knowing that some of the barriers were there. And as you were talking, I was just imagining for someone who has a pre-existing relationship, it must feel like it's falling apart, like it's being frayed.
Right.
Do you ever talk to other prisoners or their family members or
All the time.
just
um,
similar things of,
People constantly reach out to me. I'm kind of a, Temujin has taught me to fight every single battle. He's a fighter by nature. I mean, with all of his martial arts training and background. But he will not be bullied. He will not allow them to get away with anything. So, that's another thing that kind of drives me crazy, where it's like, I'll be missing a stamp from JPay and he'll be like, well, did you call the prison? Did you find out, what's going on? Why did you need to get that quarter or that 10 cents or whatever the heck it is? And it's just like, it's not worth my time in frustration to chase down all of these little things, but they're very important to him because he's had so much stolen from him.
Yeah. I remember one point in the interview where we were talking about trying to imagine sort of where I said to you, I'm trying to imagine like the love of my life, my best friend, my partner, whoever, sort of stuck in time, unable to experience life like everyone else, constantly sort of facing harm, disappointment, boredom, absolute mindless,
Yeah.
mind-numbing boredom. And there's that, I mentioned that phrase from The Wire, from the David Simon TV show, where the character Avon Barksdale says you only do 2 days. The day you come in, the day in the middle, the day at the end. And the whole idea behind that is, it is boring, it is monotonous, and you just have to sort of put it out of your mind. And one of the things I thought about that, it's really true for someone who is guilty, that you just put it out of your mind, you're doing your time. But it must be wholly different for somebody who's innocent, because every day is a battle in your mind for truth. And that just caught me. And you talked about how obvious it is this is a wrongful conviction. And we discussed some of the politics around the case. And I'm sure some people in the chat are going to have questions about why you think his conviction hasn't been overturned. But I'm just curious why you think state authorities haven't been open to taking a fresh look at the case.
So I think there's a couple reasons. Number one, the original trial prosecutor went on to be a federal judge. So I know that played a part in not wanting to admit that something, was done here. And I think that they sometimes would consider like all of the other convictions that this judge had as under question if they knew that he did this deliberate, horrible thing to Temujin. So I feel like that might be, part of the reason. And then also just the financial aspect. I mean, this county is looking at a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. So for them to admit that they were wrong, there's civil lawsuits that could be filed against these individuals, and there's civil lawsuits that could be filed against multiple attorney generals and governors within the state of Michigan, because this has been a known wrongful conviction for many, many years.
Yeah. We talked in the interview, and this is my last question, but we talked in the interview about what you imagined life would look like upon his release. But we didn't talk about what life looks like if he's never released.
It's really not an option. It's not something that I would really even think about. I mean, this case is so bad, and I plan on fighting until he's home. I mean, he's coming home. He's coming home. And I feel like he's going to be coming home this year. We have a couple developments in the case that we are excited about. There's a few things we can't talk about. And then there is also a kind of a huge issue here in Michigan that has to do impacts hundreds of thousands of people. And it has to do with a law that was written in 1927, and we just found out about it maybe a month ago. And it's called the Code of Criminal Procedures Act, and it basically has to do with a probable cause conference. And there were multiple basically there was kind of a conspiracy. I hate to use that word because everybody's like, I don't know about that, but it was basically a conspiracy because the courts stopped doing these conferences, the judges stopped requesting them, and the attorneys, and it was just kind of this known thing in Michigan for many years. And we now have a prisoner in Michigan, in one of the Michigan prisons here, who figured it out and is working with Article 3 courts, which are some very powerful federal judges that are able to assist in getting these individuals all back in front of a judge, an unbiased judge, to discuss why they did not have a probable cause conference. And Temujin's going to be one of the first that is going to be reviewed. So we're very excited about that. It's not going to be the same as being, pardoned or released, and acknowledged of his innocence, but it's also an invalid conviction. So, and in our case, it's the worst one, and it's a great example for, to put forth before all of these other individuals come forward as well. So
How many cases could be affected by this?
24,000 current prisoners right now.
Okay, 20.
And I've seen actual sealed court documents, and it's a thing. I mean, if it wasn't a thing, it would have been thrown out. It's been in the courts for about 4 years now. So we're very excited about this new development.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to these guys. Does anyone want to throw a question in the chat or join us? Feel free to go ahead and do it now. We'll give you guys a sec. And then Paula, I'll put them up so you can see them. Okay. I can't see their little typing. I know Robert's going to join us in a second. Okay, so we've got Sophie's asking, did a federal judge overturn his conviction? Do you want to walk us through sort of the conviction history and where we are now? It's kind of an interesting twisted tale.
Yeah, there's a lot that has occurred over the years. There's many appeals and opportunities to have the information brought forth. But the interesting thing, and the thing that I didn't know, and the thing that most people don't know, is you would think that, you hear of one thing that went wrong. Why can't you bring that up? And why can't you, that should be enough to get an innocent person out of prison. But what happens with the appellate courts, which is a horrific system, by the way, is that you cannot bring up something that you've already brought up before. So if you submit an appeal to the Court of Appeals and they deny it, and a lot of times they rubber stamp deny these appeals, you can never bring back up any of those claims that you mentioned in that appeal, which is crazy, because if you're absolutely innocent and a judge just rubber stamps denies you, and then you can never bring that thing up again, I mean, as time goes on, you're going to end up with less and less opportunities to really prove that you're innocent if you can't bring up things that, that occurred, things that you find out, years later, as we found multiple things in our case. A federal judge...
you find out more information as time goes, but the funnel of what you can share becomes more narrow and narrow. So it's almost like these two forces are working against each other. I know way more now, but there's less I can share.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. Keep on going. Sorry.
No, that's a good point. And in 2011, he did have a judge in Detroit. Her name was Denise Hood, and she did allow evidence that we found out after the trial to be entered onto the record. And the original trial prosecutor, who went on to become a federal judge, as you know, actually sat on her very own bench. She was superior to him. and she reviewed this case, and she basically wrote an opinion that he had prosecutor misconduct and ineffective assistance of counsel, and she ordered that he be released or given a new trial. And what happened was that that case had been they appealed it, and the case was sent out of state, and an out of state other judge came out and basically didn't say anything about no, you're not innocent. It just said you're too late.
So it went to another federal judge?
Out of state. It went to another federal judge out of state, and then that judge said basically threw a timing technicality on him and said, it doesn't, your claims don't matter because you're too late. You could be innocent, but you're too late.
So in law, you have, process violations, then substantive ones. So they were essentially, she came in and from a substantive perspective said ineffective assistance of counsel, this should be overturned. But then from a process perspective, as in like, you turned in your tax return on the 16th instead of the 15th. They said no. Is that fair, or am I oversimplifying? Wow. How did he react to that?
So he found out about that right after Amiko passed away. So Amiko was his wife, and she had ovarian cancer, and so he hasn't really talked about that period of time, but I can imagine it was probably one of the worst times that he's had in the prison system, was losing his wife and then finding out that his appeal had also, been overturned.
Wow. What year was that?
2011.
2011. Okay. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see what else we have as questions, because I'm just thinking about like for him, just listening to it, he must have felt when he was at the trial looking at what the potential evidence was, like there's no way I'm gonna be convicted, devastating blow of conviction, then the appeals, an appeal like that, devastating blows. So I'm gonna steal a question for myself here. He loses his wife. How does he maintain his optimism?
I think it has to go back to when he was studying all of his Eastern religions, and he was doing meditation, and he just has such a strong, powerful mindset, that he is very determined. And I don't know anybody who has the tenacity that he does. He will not ever let something go. And so even as far as his faith or positivity, once he hangs on to it or decides that he's going to hang on to something, it's just with him. He won't let it go. And it's something inside him, and it's just so powerful and so strong. And I think when you are in there, hope is all you have. You can't, if you're very headstrong and you're not going to let the system beat you down, then all you have is hope.
Okay. Makes sense. When did he start his studies in Eastern religion?
I would have to look at a timeline that I have. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that just in general, when something like crazy like this happens to you, you begin to question everything. You begin to question your faith. You begin to question what's real, what is the answer? What do I need to be doing? Where, I think it's a very valid kind of transition that you would go through. If you go through something like a wrongful conviction, you question, okay, how did I get here? What was I doing in my life that allowed this to happen? And if there was no reason, then you still question. You're like, okay, then why did God put me here? If there's a God, why did he put me here? Why is he allowing this to happen to me? And I think it's just one of those soul searching things that you do on a journey that's taking you in such a dark place that you kind of just want to turn over every rock. You want to see what is this religion about? What is that religion about? How does all of this apply to me? What is the truth? Why am I, why am I here? What is happening? I think that that's really what happened. And I think that that's what I would do.
I've got two great questions. I think one about the case and its progress and potential, and another question about coverage. It kind of touches on what we talked about related to coverage, which I won't give up. So the first one, now that Cleland has retired, do you think there will be any movement now?
We thought that immediately after
We may want to let him know who Cleland is. I don't think we mentioned. Yeah.
So yes, Robert Cleland is the original trial prosecutor who went on to become the federal judge. And he recently retired. It was either at the tail end of 2023 or the beginning of 2024. So we do feel as though, that's a possibility, that if nothing was going to happen while he was on the bench, that was for sure. We sure didn't think that that was going to happen. We thought that he was definitely a driving factor in the reason why Temujin was still behind bars after all these years.
And when you say driving factor, I think some people, and I definitely know this from my reporting days, you think it's easy to think you have a federal judge, you have a prosecutor, you have a state judge, you have a governor, right? And they're all unconnected. But one of the things I learned from reporting, they all went to Yale together, or they all went to Harvard together. They came in the prosecutor's office at the same time together, or the defense attorneys are dealing deals with the prosecutors. Like, their allegiance to each other is much stronger. I remember when I was in high school, my parents let this kid from our church, who happened to also be last name Blair, but he was white and he was from Colorado. But we let Adam stay with us, and he had gotten into some mischief and trouble and got arrested with a bunch of other kids. Nothing. It was like breaking into cars and all sorts of other stuff. And the public defender said to us in the courtroom, it's like a crestfallen moment for me. The public defender said, "Look, I have to do business with these prosecutors. I can fight for this person. I can fight for Adam as hard as possible. I can take it to the mat. But then when I have this person over here that I really need to save, because their sentence is going to be so long, or fill in the blank, they won't do business with me." And I was like, what? But it made me really look at and it was very informative when I was a reporter later, look at the justice system very differently. Each of these people, each of these attorneys or judges or whoever, their connections to each other will always be stronger than theirs to the defendant. Like, it's a one-time customer, hopefully, maybe two-time customer.
Right.
You don't want to be bringing them so much business that they're favoring you. But could you talk a little bit about the interconnections between Cleland and the rest of the players? I know we could be.
Yeah, it gets so intricate really quickly. So Cleland was actually running for our state attorney general at the time of the crime. He actually found out that he lost the bid for attorney general the day of the murder. And just the politics of the victim himself, his father was a mayor of a small town. And he had made contributions to Robert Cleland for the attorney general bid that he had been on. So, there's also a judge in Port Huron, a woman judge named Mona Armstrong, who was involved in one of Temujin's appeals years later, who went to school and was college roommates with Dana Nessel, who is our current attorney general. And it's just like, and then Dana Nessel is, head of the conviction integrity unit, who allowed his case to be researched and investigated for 2 years. And then all of a sudden, after 2 years, closed on another technicality. And it's just like all of these crazy interpersonal connections, as you said, are somehow influencing the outcome, and that's why we've called Temujin a political prisoner for years.
That it really is like politics play as much and the system plays as much in it. And it's a good segue into the next question that I was going to ask, because one of the things that I think we discuss, and I don't know if I used actual names, but you've got cases like this argument for Scott Peterson's innocence. You've got arguments for Adnan Syed's innocence, and it's getting lots and lots of attention. So you have these cases that are getting a ton of attention over innocence with much less, regardless of how you feel about the cases, they might be toss-ups or they might be X, Y, or Z, but this isn't, Temujin's case is not a toss-up. It's not even close. So, Sophie asked, have podcasters approached similarly to the way Gilbert King did Bone Valley, which is about Leo Schofield, who was his parole hearing, I think, is on in 2 days. But it leads to the broader question. Have Sophie's question, have podcasters approached, and maybe why do you think Temujin's case doesn't get the attention that some of these others do?
Well, we do have a couple really good podcasts coming out, some more. We are going to be on Suspect, which we're very excited about, and then Jessica Knoll and Todd
McCombs,
Todd are going to be doing a deep dive on it. I think it does kind of depend on who has all of the information. I'm just becoming more organized. At first I was reaching out to all these journalists, and I tried so hard to just build this up and snowball it and make it as big as I could. And I didn't really understand, basically telling the narrative. How do we get new information out there that makes it new and exciting? I mean, people, I think, have heard about the airplane theory, and there's so much more to this case than just that one piece.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it does depend on who's telling the story, and how much time and energy they devote into calling Temujin and getting more information and hearing, directly from him. I think we're getting there. I think we've got some really great new stuff coming out. Jack Lawrence did a great job over in Australia with the 1 minute remaining. I think he did 6 or 7 episodes. There is actually the very interesting, it's a broadcasting station in Sanilac County, which is the county where the victim was from, is doing probably a 5 or 6 episode deep dive starting this Thursday. They're recording the first one. And so that's going to be interesting because it's right in the heart of, where all of this happened. And we've got, of course, a $50,000 reward for anybody who has information leading to, the actual conviction and release, conviction of the actual murderers, could be 1 or 2, and the release of Temujin. And then, it's just, there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot coming up, and there's new stuff coming out all the time. So that makes it interesting.
And I think you're hitting on that key point that I think a lot of these cases have to do with how the story was originally told the first time, right? Mm-hmm. Peterson, Casey Anthony, did they get a lot of attention in the beginning? And how it's told afterwards almost has more to do with whether it gets noticed than how many times or other things like that. So it's good to hear we were Dana Pohl, who's a podcaster, True Crime PI, and Seeking Justice, and I were talking about that with one of the cases that she's working on, that it's just this far away, and it's really just going to take somebody telling the story, the right person telling the story in a beautiful way. So we've got a question from Tess Hurd, who's another podcaster who I know is interested in doing Temujin's case as well. So add tests to your list, and if you're cool with it, I'll connect you guys. She's asking, how did they even get a solid conviction?
They assassinated his character is what they did. They laser focused on Temujin. They never really did an investigation. They never interviewed Crystal. They never interviewed Scott's brother or his parents or his friends. They just, at the hospital, the detective was talking to the family, and Crystal Merrill was there with her little sister. And the little sister mentioned, Crystal's ex-boyfriend who was into ninja and rode a motorcycle and liked heavy metal music. And the detective said, "Who's that? Oh my gosh, that like, tell me more about him." And that was really it from the beginning. There was also a lot of corruption and kind of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours going on in the legal profession, between the judge, the prosecutor, the attorney on the case. It was all
Wait, attorney,
very
you mean the defense attorney?
defense attorney. Because he actually was part owner of a bar. He was on probation. He wasn't even supposed to be in a bar. He was living in a bar at the time of the trial, and he was on probation.
Wait, so the defense attorney,
Yes.
the Temujin, is living in a bar on criminal probation or like license?
Criminal probation. He was an alcoholic, and he actually had a drug conviction, and he later lost his law license for selling cocaine in Ohio. And this is all on record.
Wow.
And they all knew it. The judge and the prosecutor knew that he was on probation, but they would all go to his bar and he would comp them drinks. And
is that part of why the federal judge was like, for this is ineffective assistance of counsel?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, that was part of it. Absolutely.
So Tess had another question that I think sort of fits something to talk about. Could you talk about the Innocence Project? Because I know it's not one big organization, but the Innocence involvement in the case.
Sure. So the Innocence Project in New York, the Cardozo Law Innocence Project, the original one, they mostly deal with DNA cases, and there is no DNA in this case. There was no physical or forensic evidence whatsoever tying my husband to the case. However, in the 1990s, there is a documentary on YouTube. If you Google it, it's called Justice Incarcerated, and you might need to put in Fred Freeman. It'll pop right up. And you can see that Barry Scheck, who was one of the founders of the Innocence Project, is in that video talking about how bad this case is. And so he's supported us for years. We do have, I believe, there's a page out there on the Innocence Project's on their website about Temujin's case. But as far as like them advocating really hard and advocating, they just don't do that for non-DNA cases. But he is represented by the University of Michigan Innocence Clinic, which is pretty good, very good, well-respected.
And they had the case before you were even involved, right? You spoke to them very early on. They've been focused on this for a long, long time.
A long time. Mm-hmm.
So we've got one of the things I wanted to ask. I've got some questions from Robert and Sophie teed up, but the conviction integrity unit. So in a lot of states, and even local prosecutors' offices at times, there's been a focus on setting aside resources to look into old convictions, either because something like what happened in Baltimore with the gun trace task force scandal, let's go look at those cases, or particularly, individuals petition to have the conviction integrity unit to review it. I had not really seen a conviction integrity unit respond the way that it happened in this case. So Robert's form of a question is more of a statement. He was asking if you could talk about the conviction integrity unit and their nonsense.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable, honestly. And our there's a great publication here in Michigan. It's called Voice of Detroit, and they actually put out an article that said that basically the Detroit or the Michigan's Conviction Integrity Unit betrays all by leaving Kensu in prison. It's just absolutely absurd what happened in this case. So, and it's all documented. Again, we have all of the original content, the original application that was submitted. We know that they wrote a report. They found him innocent of the crime, and they just say that they write a recommendation to set aside the conviction, which they did. And we know that there was the memo, and we know it was written April 21st of 2021 was the date of the memorandum that was written, and it was written.
It's a memo saying that his conviction should be overturned, drafted by people in the Conviction Integrity Unit.
That is correct.
Okay.
And Dana Nessel, our Attorney General, is refusing to release the report. She is saying that it's client-attorney privilege, and that she's not saying that it doesn't exist. We did try and sue her for it in a federal court, and the judge sided with her and said that it is, considered attorney work product, and that she does not have to release it.
So basically, they kicked it out. For some reason, it didn't move forward, whether it was overruled or it was left in draft. But
so, the reason that they closed the case and did not release the report, the reason that they gave us was that the new evidence, which is required for the Conviction Integrity Unit, the new evidence that was reviewed was considered cumulative to the other witnesses that had already testified at trial. So at trial, there were 9 unimpeached alibi witnesses who said he was in the Upper Peninsula. He couldn't have committed this crime. We found out in 2019 via a FOIA report, which is a Freedom of Information Act request, that there was an additional 10th witness who was interviewed by the prosecutor during the original trial, before the trial, and they never released that person's name or that information over to the defense.
So that, in theory, would be exculpatory evidence that they ruled that it was a harmless error?
It was a Brady violation. They
Right.
absolutely should have, disclosed that. I don't think that they ever came out and said why they never released it, but it was in a police report. The name of the person that the state police went to go and interview up in the Upper Peninsula. Temujin went on a date with this girl. It was the night before the murder. He went on a date, and they had soup in this big boy restaurant, and his car had broken down. He was in no rush to go downstate and commit some elaborate murder with a broken down car. He was trying to play kissy face with this girl in this restaurant in the Upper Peninsula. And she could have testified to that fact. She could have testified to his state of mind during the trial, but the defense never gave us her name. Temujin thought her name was Beth Steer, Steir, and her name was, or he thought it was Beth Speer, Spear, or Speer, and it was Beth Steer. And the police had actually found her, interviewed her, and she added credence to his alibi that he was not, he was with her on the date. He wasn't in a rush to leave. And they just basically said that she was cumulative and she wouldn't have added anything additional. So
this case is one of those, it's so infuriating. It's one of those, I always talk about how some people just remain intentionally stupid. Like you're having a conversation with them and they're deliberately being stupid. This feels like being intentionally obtuse, right? That I would think if I were a governor and I happened to be a governor like Governor Whitmer, who has this opportunity, if she can convince progressives that she isn't too conservative, to be vice president, right? Like, why wouldn't you take a look at this case?
So Whitmer is a prosecutor as well.
Yep.
She was a prosecutor for 6 months, and I think she has very loyal connections to the Prosecuting Attorneys Association of Michigan. The current prosecutor in St. Clair County, where my husband was wrongfully convicted, was on the board of the Prosecutors Association of Michigan. He's the current state director. There's a
Mm,
picture of him and her right next to each other. You know, on one of the websites or on YouTube. And he is also the same prosecutor who, you know, could release him, who could look into this, who could free him, is on the National District Attorneys Association board. So he's on a national board for prosecutors, and he refuses to release or acknowledge Temujin's wrongful conviction.
so we've got a couple more questions. This one from Sophie. It's sorry if she missed it, but how long have the two of you been married? And then I wanted to just add to her question. Could you tell us a little bit about what it was like to make the decision to get married? I just say that, like, even in the best of circumstances, I mean, like, if you're sane and responsible, it's a difficult, complex decision whether to date someone, whether to marry them. These are more complicated circumstances than most of us can imagine. But, like, what was the process? I know you can't speak for him, but I can imagine for him, having experienced a lot of loss, it wasn't easy to make the choice to, you experience that much loss and sometimes you run away from
Mm.
attachment. So, like, in a way, I look at his story and maybe I'm just leaning on my own experience with loss and running away from attachment.
Oh, I lost your audio.
Oh, I think, wow, that's courageous. And then I look at you and I see the same thing, and I'm like, what courage, right? Like, what unbelievable courage for you to do that. So, how long have you guys been married, and how did we get there?
I still ask myself that question. I'm like, how did this happen? I mean, my goodness, it's just, you know, you grow up and you never in a million years think I'm going to marry a guy that's in prison. Like that was just never in my mind, you know. We've been married since November of 2022. So we're coming up on our second anniversary. Um, and, you know, it was really, it was it was just something that I absolutely knew. I knew it. I knew when he asked me. I knew it before he asked me. I just knew he was the one for me. It's kind of hard to like explain it. Um, but I mean I'm a spiritual person, I'm a religious person, and I felt like I absolutely was given confirmation that this was the man that was for me. And
Yeah, so it's like one of those out there. It's very funny. So I don't know if we talked about this on the episode, but my mom died last year, and it's not a bad thing. But uh, so what was it? It was like a couple weeks ago. I was like, Dad, the one thing I wish I could have asked Mom was, what was it like when she met you, and how did she know? And which prompted him to tell me and say to me, you will just know, and it'll be like something you've never felt before. And he said, you will blabble when you try to explain what it was. So Sophie asked a more practical question than my question, which is, tell us the qualities that you love about him.
well, I absolutely probably first off the bat, I fell in love with his intelligence. He's brilliant. He has probably the thing that I desire the most is his incredible memory. I cannot remember anything, and he is just so smart, and I've always found that a very attractive quality. But he's also just very, like, I feel so safe with him. I feel like I could just crawl in his arm.
Mm,
Nobody could hurt me. Nobody, like, he's just, I feel comfort there, you know.
that's so beautiful.
He's just in his positivity. I mean, again, you know, I mean, that's something that everybody comments on and sees and talks about. And, you know, he'll call me and he's so chipper, and I'm like angry and cranky and, why aren't you home? And he's like, hey, baby bear. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, he gives me so much strength. And he is just like so meant for me, you know. I mean, we complement each other so well. We really get along. Like, he is so funny. Oh my God. He just has me just in tears laughing sometimes. It's just a special relationship. It's hard to explain.
Oh yeah, no, no, no. But one of the things you use that phrase, like you would feel safe in his arms, and it, in my head, I just conjured it up, and it just made as beautiful as everything you were saying, because it was really touching me in one way. But that moment, there was a pang for me that you don't have that opportunity.
Yeah.
Maybe someday.
Yeah.
So we've got follow-ups from Tess and Sophie that are getting around the same thing. Oh, Sophie is asking us about how can we get more attention for his wrongful conviction, and Tess asked a similar question, although it may not be exactly the same. How can we help advocate for him? Because I was thinking to myself as I was looking for those, attention can be really powerful.
Yeah.
If it is a political situation, maybe powerful, more powerful than the courts themselves. And then the other thing is, as I was reading Tess's question, I was thinking advocacy is like really, it can be a lot of things. It can be fighting for the conviction to be overturned. It could be writing him a letter. It could be helping somebody in his life that he cares about. It could be helping you with your inevitable puppy nonprofit. Paula has 14 puppies right now. Long story. They're both of their puppies, but it's really endearing. But how can people be of help? How can people get attention for the case? How can they advocate for him?
So sharing on social media, I mean, really, it's just going to take an avalanche of media. You know, if you know a reporter, a journalist, anybody at all that can help tell the story, that can help ask their follow, if you know somebody who has a big following, if you know a celebrity or somebody who has a lot of people, um, that, you know, kind of follow what they do, you know, if you could reach out to them and talk to them about the story and ask them to, you know, have their followers reach out to Governor Whitmer and ask her to grant clemency. um, you know, I've been personally hammering the National District Attorneys Association, because Mike Wendling is on that board. And so I will, you know, I've actually got postcards where I'll hand them out and people can sign them and put a stamp on them and send them in. And basically saying to the National District Attorneys Association, why are you allowing this board member to remain on your board when he has the country's worst wrongful conviction? I'm really about accountability. So again, Whitmer, as you said, is looking at a potential presidency run. I think, you know, on every single social media platform that we have, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, every single thing on her actual webpage, for the state of Michigan, just kind of ask, you know, why is Temujin Kensu still in prison? That's really, I think, what's going to end up making her move the needle is political pressure. If she doesn't see the political risk of not letting him go, she needs to see that.
Yeah. You know, Sophie's in the chat sort of joking that I should get back up and cover this case. I'm not sure if I could go back to my old full-on journalist hat, but she also mentioned Gilbert King, and I was thinking to myself, like, maybe Gilbert and I do need to get together to talk about this case and find your person who could really tell that story, because I bet we could put our brains together and come up with some real good names to tell the story and put the pressure on. So to kind of end, I wanted to like, you have something that I think a lot of people, like, they look at your situation, they can't imagine, right, what it's like. But I also look at your situation and say, you have something so amazing and so beautiful, that you found the love of your life and he found you. So I wanted to close just talking about that beautiful piece of it, because I know in our episode you couldn't see me because we didn't have cameras on, but like, that was the part that probably got the most tears from me. And so I just wanted to end with your thoughts on the relationship.
It's incredible that, and he said that for years, he was so depressed after he lost Emiko, and he was just wondering, how on earth am I ever going to find any, even if I did get out at this point in my life, what, I've got nobody out there. I've got nothing, and so he was out in the yard. It was a snowy night. He loves the snow. And he was just watching all this beautiful snowflakes fall down, these huge chunks of snow falling down. And it was right before Nolan came to visit him and wrote that article. And he just said a prayer, God, is she out there? Is there somebody out there for me? Please send her to me. And, I read the article, and it's really
Wow.
interesting. What's really interesting, Jason, is that, probably about a month or two, I think it was in November sometime. It was a, same type of situation where I was like, I'm, almost 44, 43 years old. I probably should meet somebody. And, if I'm going to meet somebody now, maybe God, maybe now's the time. And can you send that person to me? And so we were kind of both praying for each other at the same time, I think. And then, it all just kind of happened. So never give up, never lose hope. I mean,
You guys were those volcanoes in the Disney short that were like hanging on the other side of it. Good Lord, I'm gonna go listen to that now. No, I can relate. Like, it's mysterious how those things happen. So on the day, if I have this right, before the writer of the article that you read, that led you to him, Matt, he was making that prayer, and right around the same time, you were making that prayer.
Yeah, mine was a little bit earlier. Mine was in November, but yeah, I had prayed about it, and I thought, oh, it would be incredible if I met it's maybe now's the time in my life where, if you were to send, I would open up my heart, God, if you were to send the right man to me. And it was just really crazy because even when I wrote to him, I had no idea it was him. That was the furthest thing from my mind. There was no way that was the guy that God was sending to me,
I didn't expect by the end of this conversation, what I would be thinking is how grateful I am that you two found each other.
I know. It was incredible. It was
Gratitude.
really incredible.
But I interrupted you, sorry.
No, it's just crazy because he he never thought that he would find somebody that would meet him in prison and fight for him the way that I fought for him. And so he's just, absolutely in shock and constant awe of it. And I, I knew a couple months later, I was just kind of asking God, I'm like, is this the guy that I prayed for, and then I got my confirmation. So, and
Wow.
God gave me my confirmation 3 times.
Really? Tell
Yeah.
us about them.
So I love country music. I'm a country music fan, and I was on the bus um, heading home from work, and I was listening to my earbuds. I had my earbuds on, and there was a song that came on by Matt Stell, and I was I wasn't even paying attention, but I think I had just talked to him or just sent him a message on JPay on the email thing. And I remember asking myself, God, is this the guy that you said, like, is this the one? Is this the one that I prayed for? And I wasn't even thinking of God giving me the answer, but that song came on by Matt Stell, and the song is I Prayed for You.
Oh, wow.
And what was crazy about it is I didn't even realize it, didn't even pay attention that was my answer. It didn't even dawn on me. I was just listening to a good song. And I got off the bus. I got to my vehicle, and I went to drive home from getting off the bus, and I turn on the radio. It comes on automatically, and it's country music, and it's the same song.
Mhm.
And then I'm like, oh, that song again. I love this song. And then it dawned on me. I'm like, I prayed for you. I'm like, wait a minute. And then I had 2 presets in my Jeep at the time for country music. And I switched to the other radio station in my Jeep, and it was the same song.
Wow. That's amazing. So, you know what? All the other podcasters, when Temujin gets out, can have him on to talk about wrongful convictions. I want to have you guys back on to talk about love stories.
We would love to.
Yeah. Well, all you guys in the chat, thank you for all your awesome questions. Paula, thanks for coming in. And, just you can look at it in this chat if you scroll up or down it, and I'll save it for you if you can't see it all. But he's going to have a lot of fans and friends and people willing to help him out and befriend him when he gets out. So, just give him, I'm thinking about the names I'm seeing in this chat. It's not even hyperbole to say that they would be there. So, just let him know and give him our best. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody listening. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for your support. We really couldn't do it without you.
Yeah. I mean, and that's one of the things that you talk in the episode about how meaningful it is to you for people to do these things.
They really get us through.
Yeah.
They really do.
All right. So, true crime people, you're doing good. You're doing good things. On those days where it feels bad, you're doing good for Paula. So, keep it up there. All right, Paula. We'll see you guys. And Paula, you and I can chat in the back about all of our mini plans.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you again.
Yeah.